Welcome to the Speak and Get What You Want podcast, where you learn to communicate like the world's most successful leaders. Now, here are your hosts, TK Stratton and Chad Kerby.
You know, one of my favorite quotes from Zig Ziglar is, you can have anything in this world you want if you help enough people get what they want. And I don't think there's any greater example of that than who we have as our guest on the podcast today. And that's Bryan Hatch. Bryan, great to be with you today.
Dude, I'm so happy to be here with you, Chad. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
You know, and it's interesting, Bryan, I share that quote because it's really something that when I think about you, you really live by, and you really try and get people what they want. And what it's done for you is really propelled you into having a really successful career. So let me just start off by asking you this. Why is it that you always have approached business and life in that way, where you just are like, okay, what can I give them? What can I give them? Because something we talk a lot about on the Speak and Get What You Want podcast is that everyone's favorite subjects themselves. And that's something that you've really leveraged to be successful in the career that, or the opportunity I had to work with you, but also in the many other people that you've been able to bless and help their career. So why has that always been a mantra that you've lived by?
Well, it's actually kind of interesting that you mentioned that. I have been a fan of personal development for as long as I can think about it. As long as I was focused on doing something besides school as a high school kid.
Right.
And like I listened to Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn and some of the original people. So
Sure.
the first time I heard that quote was likely on like a cassette tape that said you can Stephen R. Covey, you can get what you want if you help other people get what they want. And so while that hasn't necessarily been a mantra of mine, I've recognized that principle at play in my life, because I can see every time that I've gone to help somebody accomplish something super big or important in their business or in their life, it certainly has given me more opportunities. So I would say that as a starting block, that's what I've done. I've looked at people and said, what do they need? And sometimes I've looked at some of the kind of the bigger characters I've worked with, and they could have had a million people help them with what I helped them with. But there was something about the way that we interacted and the way that we communicated that created something pretty magical, and days that I'll always cherish. Some of the friends that I've met along the way have been fantastic. And you're one of them, Chad. So, yeah.
Well, and I appreciate that, Bryan. And I'll say the same to you. But as you talk about some of those big players, whether it be Brendan Burchard, whoever it might have been, you've really stepped into a space and have had tremendous success when, like you said, these individuals were thinking, how can I grow, ironically, their personal development business? And you sit back and go, okay, what can I do to really make their life better? And in turn, it's really blessed your life.
Yeah. And it's funny when I look at specifically that relationship, um, it was weird circumstances. The company I worked for at the time was Infusionsoft, and they had partners all over the place, and they wanted to be
Right.
partners with all these big people. And there were multiple people. I'm hard pressed to remember if you were involved in the conversation. People said like, "Hey, we want to have a relationship with him. We used to have a relationship with this guy, and we don't anymore, and we want to." And
Right.
I thought, well, what could I do? And I reached out a couple of times and tried to get a hold of his tech team and said, "Hey, what do you need?" And then out of the blue, one day I got an email said, "Hey, can you do this thing?" And it was a little tech thing of an upsell that at the time, way back then, everybody knows this now. When you check out, if you want to add, an extra little widget to your order, you can sell an extra $20 thing or whatever. So it doesn't seem all that magical now, but at the time it was pretty difficult. It wasn't something that's just
No,
like,
it's innovative for
yeah,
sure.
everybody's doing. So I said, yeah, get me on the line with your tech guy. And so he said, oh, just shoot me over the details. I'll make sure it gets done. And I'm like, what the heck? Most bigwigs have a tech guy. So I was like, all right, just here. He's like, well, I said, let me just do it for you. And so I did it for him. And I sent it over to him, and he's like, oh, dude, thank you so much. And then he launched what I built for him 7 days later. and made him an undisclosed amount of money. It was a lot of money just from what I did. And that was what opened the door for like, oh, okay. So like, what can you actually do for me if you could help me with that? So I always seek to, if I can enlighten, if I can brighten, if I can help you with what is your problem, at minimum, we're going to have a fun conversation about it afterwards. At maximum, we're going to do business together, whatever the case is. I just like to help people. So yeah.
Well, but you said a lot, and I hope people really heard what you were saying there, because what you were doing, Bryan, is you were listening to find their problem. You were reaching out saying, okay, what is their problem? And I can be their solution. By the way, people often say, okay, well, how do you get in contact with the Brendans of the world, or these super important, influential, I should say influential, everyone's important, right? But
Yeah.
these influential people, how do we get in contact? Well, they have problems and challenges that they're facing. You become the solution, and magic happens.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you did.
And there's something to be said about authenticity though as well, because I have met many people that play at high levels, whether they're known in the public sphere or not, but they typically get approached by a lot of people that have like a backhanded idea that's like, hey, if you do this, then I get it's not really truly there to help the other person. It's like, I want to help me. It's totally different to go help somebody for the sake of helping them and then come what may, versus I'm going to go help them with the tactic that they're going to need me, and then we're going to do business. It's just different. So I've felt that difference in the way that I authentically approach the person. So
And I love that you bring that up, because Bryan, that really is the key. Because some people may be listening going, oh, I've tried that approach, it didn't work. I tried that approach, it didn't work. But how did you show up? And were you truly there to help them solve their problem? Or were you just looking for a door for you to walk through to serve yourself?
yeah,
And that's a big difference.
it really is. I've found that genuine want to help trumps so many other things, because everybody's trying to sell something nowadays. And if you're genuinely trying to help other people, it makes a difference. I don't want to be too generic in that, but you have to really want to help instead of
Right.
want to help so that I can get. It's different.
Oh, absolutely. It's huge. And it all comes down to this word that you use a lot, and it's powerful, but how intentional are you being in your approach and everything you're doing? Now, Bryan, you've launched a podcast, The Intentional Way, and I absolutely love what the goal and the story behind it. But why don't you share with the audience what it was that got you to take everything that you've experienced in life, and you've had a tremendous amount of success, to really share it in podcast form?
I'm going to share something with you and your audience here, Chad, that I haven't shared publicly. It's pretty close to the chest, so I invite you to learn from my experience. But um, there are things in life that make you go up and down. There's just challenges, whether it's family life or business. There's things that go up and down, and at the time there were some family situations that caused me to kind of peer into some muddy water, some tough, difficult things in life. And the end of that year, I had been seeking through prayer and meditation and studying and writing and journaling, like, what am I really here for? What is my purpose? What do I like? Why am I actually on this earth? And through a lot of work, I will not shortcut this. It's going to sound so short when I say it to you, but it was months of really diving into, what am I good at? What am I here for? What have I done that's been successful? What could I do that will be successful? And I sought through prayer and meditation, like, what could I do and offer the world that is based upon my uniqueness in this world. There are a lot of people, we all have different skill sets and different gifts, but one of mine is to be intentional. I'm not, people that have met me, some people that are listening probably now are like, well, I know Bryan. I am not perfectly intentional all the time, but that is definitely my intent, is to always have an intention everywhere I go and in everything that I do and everything that I say. So even the words that I use, my wife laughs. I'm very specific in the word choices that I use with my wife, with my family, unless I get emotional. But if I'm on top of it, it's very poignant. So when I kind of got this dough and needed it and figured out what I am great at, what I'm uniquely qualified to do, and the studies that I've been doing my whole life, intention just lined up. And then I started putting it into motion. I actually got on a podcast, and I actually turned the tables after being a guest. I then interviewed the host, and he said, "Man, I don't know why you're not teaching this stuff." And I was like, "You have a point." And that was a little bit of the starting block that got me into feeling very purposeful in starting a podcast so I could share that message with the world, because there are so many people that have so many things going right intentionally.
Right.
And I want to share that with the world, including the things that I've learned.
It's interesting that you bring that up, that you're very intentional, just by nature, but yet it took you months and months of really praying and meditating and focus on, okay, what direction am I going to do? And you really answered a question that you and I were chatting about before we started the podcast. You and I were visiting for just a moment, and we were talking about how so many people lack clarity. So many people lack clarity and direction. And because they lack clarity and direction, they're not very intentional about what they do because they don't really know what to do. So as you were trying to figure out what's your next chapter, what's your next step, how was it? I mean, because a lot of people want to give up, Brian. A lot of people are just like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Mhm.
What really pushed you to get to where you are today, launching a podcast and being very successful with it?
Well, I would really point to that intrinsic internal motivation. I also feel like God gave me a little bit of a lift of like, hey, man, this is part of why you're there. And
Mm.
so it felt like it came together in a way. And I'm not gonna lie, the tech tools nowadays to be able to get a podcast out, to edit, and to get things moving, the barrier of entry has lowered, and I really love that. So there's so many things that kind of combine to make it easy enough that I could punch through it and get out there and get my episodes out and start teaching people. So there's a lot of things that came together, but it is an internal, intrinsic, like no one could listen and I'm still going to do it. Like I'm finally got to that point. And I've heard so many people, so many business coaches, so many leaders say, you got to love what you do and you got to do it. Even if no one paid you, you have to be able to. And I'm like, yeah, I need to get paid. Um, but in this case, I felt like I don't care if I get paid. I will get paid. That's the vision. And the same token, I don't need to get paid to do it because that's the way I feel about it.
Wow, that is awesome. I love that. Last week we had John Felkins on from Dave Ramsey's Entree Leadership Team, and he was talking about how he had went for 7 years. It took him 7 years to get his engineering degree, and then he realized that that's not for me. So and then he's had a very successful career as a business coach with Dave Ramsey and the Entree Leadership Team. But the question I have for you, Brian, is what if someone's saying, okay, I haven't been living very intentional. I've just been living very opportunistically. I haven't been very purposeful in my approach to life. What can they do to begin living a more intentional life, being more deliberate in what they're doing?
I've had that exact same question from some of the listeners on my podcast of how do I start? Where do I start? And
Yeah.
there are things that could make it complicated, but I like to simplify them. The thing that's easiest is to one, just have an intention. I mean, that might sound overly generic, but what I'm saying is like right now, in the conversation you are, like whatever you're doing, people are listening right now. You're listening or watching this podcast. Okay. Now, what was your intention when you clicked on the thumbnail to listen to this episode? Like, what was your intention in that? Just to pass
Mm.
some time? That's fine. You can pass the time. I'm not saying that any intention is like super important. It has to be perfect. But if you just did it because out of habit, like I'm going to watch this or I'm going to listen to this. But if you're like, I want to gain what this person has and I'm going to put something into play in my life. See how that intention is different? So like
Right. Yeah.
having one saying, with what I'm doing presently, and I don't care if you're listening, if you're making dinner for the kids, if you're on your way to work, if you're on the way home from work, what is your intention in this moment? What is the intention in the next 10 minutes? And I find that if I can check in with that constantly, I find how non-intentional I am or unintentional I am,
Wow.
because you're recognizing, oh, I'm just showing up. Like they always told us in school, showing up is 90% of your grade. Baloney. I recognize you can't get past your grades if you don't show up. But the same token, if all you do is show up and nothing gets in your mind and actually out into your heart and into your actions, it's worthless. So start by setting intention. That's one thing you can do. And Chad, the second thing you can do is write down what your day is going to look like. And some people are like, "Well, I'm not a planner. I fly by the seat of my pants, and I'm like whatever happens, that's fine." There's still things you're going to do. You're going to eat lunch. You're going to go to the gym. Whatever you're going to do, like write down the things you're going to do. But then, what am I going to do when I get there? How am I going to be at the gym? I'm going to be like solely focused. I'm going to sweat until I die. Or I'm going to talk to my neighbors. I'm going to get to know some people at the gym. Like, I don't care what the intention is. Have one. And then if you know what you're going to be doing that day, I'm going to be sitting down with my family and having dinner. How do you want that dinner to go? Do you want to be like, hey, well, how was your day? How was your day? How was your day? And it's like the same thing you've been doing for the last 20 years. Great. But just think of what you want it to be like and then show up in a different way than you have. And then you'll find some really magic in life. That's what I feel like. So long-winded answer to a short question, but I love it.
Yeah, and I think what you shared there, it reminded me of the great philosopher Hitch from the movie Hitch. What did he say? Wake up each day, live each day as though it's on purpose.
Yeah.
Something, and I may have slaughtered the quote there, but the reality is being purposeful in how you approach things, and that's such a great reminder, Bryan, because so many times we just show up and we're just going through the motions of life, but it's easy to fall into that trap as we face opposition, challenges, difficulties that life will often present before us, you
Yeah.
know so being intentional is key. And I love that you shared that, because I thought the same thing, or I was thinking as you were sharing that, okay, how am I showing up to dinner with my family? How am I showing up? I have a great friend who's a criminal defense attorney, and he said that early in his career, he would sit down at dinner and he would never be present. Now, for me, I could never be a criminal defense attorney. That would be so difficult for me, just because, you're representing somebody. And if you make a mistake, the outcome for that individual, Bryan, could you imagine? And so he said, I wasn't there at dinner. My family, I was there,
Mhm.
but I wasn't there. So how much does being present connect with being intentional?
They're they're two sides of the same coin, really. That's I end my podcast with be present. Uh, the only way to live life is to be present here and now. And so wherever you are, be there, because there's nowhere else that actually you're going to make a difference right now, right in this very moment. You can make the biggest impact right where you are. And so if you're there and you're just showing up, you're just going through the motions of life, uh, it's going to be dull, and people are going to experience you as maybe not even there. Like, they won't have memories of you being there because you made no difference. We always make a difference. Every person makes a difference, but they're going to experience you that way, and they're going to feel like forgettable. Not that we have to be memorable in every experience, but if you want to have an experience where it changes your life, changes the family's life, changes your business, changes your team's life, show up in a way that tells me and shows everybody around you that you're present. You're not checking your phone. You're not looking at other things. You're not, oh, someone called me. It's like, I am here with you right now, and I don't care what else is going on outside of this. When I leave this place, I'll go somewhere else. But right now, I'm here with you. So I don't think you
Wow.
can truly be intentional if you're not present.
Wow, that is powerful. So what if someone struggles being present? And it is tricky, Bryan. There are so many ways for us to be connected to other places than the place we're at, right? So I would say that many, if not everyone, struggles at times with being present. how can they work on being more present? Because you know what, it's I bet you, if you, whether you are a parent, a business leader, an entrepreneur, whatever you are, or all of the above, you know, being present is a major challenge. So how do you work on that as you're seeking to be more intentional about being present?
Yeah. I take this part from a guy that I got to be in his last venture before he passed away, Larry King. And one of the things I love that he taught me is he wanted to be curious in every conversation. And I actually saw that evident. No matter who he was talking to, he would start asking more questions. And you thought, oh, well, that's just Larry King. But it's being curious. And I find that if you're in a scenario where you're having a conversation or even just listening and you're not having any questions come in your mind of like, oh, wonder why, or how is that, why they do this, or why they say that, then you're missing the boat. Now, you don't have to do that in order to be present, but I'm saying that's my cue is am I curious, am I seeking like something else besides this? Because I mean, you can get really geeked out on this and be specific and even nitpick at the word choices they're using. Now, not in a critical way, but if someone's talking to you and they say, blah, 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 and that really hurt. Oh, what does it mean to really hurt to you? You know, like they're
Mm,
like, I don't know, I was crying. Oh, okay, I didn't know. Like when you're crying, it's like when you understand what they're actually meaning by the words instead of just taking it at face value. Like, oh, when it really hurts, that what I think of when it really hurts is different than when you think. So like you can really get specific on these things, but I think being curious in the conversations you're in, because that's what we do. We have conversations. That's how we build relationships and connections. But you have to be curious about what's happening because novelty reigns king in our brains. We need something new. And especially when you get to be middle-aged and older, you've had conversations enough that like recognize it might be a new conversation for that young buck you're talking to, but for you, like I've had this conversation 500 times. But if you're not
right.
curious about what's happening, you're going to get bored. And that's what I think it makes it easy to get distracted by the phone or the ping because we're like looking for something novel because you're like, this guy, this is boring. Whatever this guy's saying over here, this lady, it's just so boring. But when you can actually think, no, I'm going to make it fun by being curious about how they're saying it, what words they used. I didn't understand that. I never knew that before. And you'll find people light up when you're like, I mean, I've talked to some people about things that I'm legitimately going into the conversation bored out of my mind. But when I listen to be curious and they're like, oh, when I got into the credits and the balance and the debits and the accounting practices, and I started asking them questions instead of being bored, man, I actually had a fun conversation about accounting, which is that's not my forte. That's not where I shine. But I had a great conversation. So that's how you do it. I think you got to be curious.
Yeah, that is huge, Brian. That is a huge insight that I hope everyone really heard and jump on, because being curious in every conversation, as you were just sharing that, I was thinking to myself how often, you know, when I go and pick up my boys from basketball practice, or, you know, sitting down at the dinner table, whatever it might be, and hey, how'd practice go? Oh, it was good. All right. What? And then that's it. You know, we're on our way. Really? Why was it good? Oh, well, because this. Interesting. Tell me more. That's a totally different level. And we talk a lot about connecting, you know, with the Speak and Get What You Want book and podcast. And this right here is a huge nugget that you just shared with everyone, Brian, because are you curious in your conversation? And even if, you know, even if you're not super excited about it, once you get more curious, and that's what I believe you were alluding to, it like, you know, turned the conversation from black and white to color, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just a
It makes
totally
it
different
fun.
experience.
Makes conversations fun. If you ever find yourself bored in a conversation, it's your fault. Like you can be fun in a conversation that has nothing to do with any of your expertise. It could be the opposite of what you like, and you could still have a lot of fun in the conversation because you're being curious about what they're saying, why they're saying it, how they got that learning, where did it come from, and that's the zest of life, Chad. I get into the details of people's lives, and you're going to find out there's a lot of cool people and a lot of cool things they've done. I remember talking to a guy, Chad, on a podcast, and he said, I'm not that interesting. He was the host of this podcast. And I said, are you kidding me? Have you heard what you've been saying? you're incredibly interesting. And I think sometimes people walk around with that, like, no one cares about what I'm doing. It's like,
Mm.
everything that we're doing is interesting if someone's curious about it. If you take it at face value, you might be bored, but you don't have to be.
Well, and I think, and I've long believed that all of us spend too much time in this life simply going through the motions
Yeah.
and not being curious in conversation and just being, I don't know, dismissive of other people and in turn dismissive in life. And so, Bryan, taking that to a whole new level of being present, being intentional, and specifically as you're talking about here, being intentional in conversation by, being curious in every conversation can really open up doors. And so when people say, okay, Chad, Bryan, I hear what Bryan's saying. I am going to be more intentional. I'm going to do that. And my first step to doing it is going to be this, Bryan. And what do you say to that?
Before you get into your next thing, like I've actually tracked my own time every minute of my day for weeks. Like I do that to learn where opportunities lie. Again, being intentional, kind of weird. Not everybody has to take that extreme, but I found there's a lot of transition time in my life. Getting ready for this, getting ready for work, getting ready for bed, getting like all the getting readies in life.
Uh-huh.
And so you could take that as a cue in your life of like, okay, the next time I'm going to go to the next phase, like I'm going to leave the office and go home. That's a transition. So anytime there's a transition between what you're doing and the next thing, which is something totally different, work and home life, making dinner and then cleaning up dinner. There's all kinds of things. Just pause for a second and then decide in that moment what you're going to intend for the next moment to be like. And that's it. Like don't even worry about what it is. Don't like it doesn't like, well, on the hierarchy of intentions, it has to be this one that's like gonna change the world. And no. Like just anything that you like it. I want my kid to smile. Sweet, great intention. That's a great intention. Okay, now do all in your power to make that happen during dinner. Just make them smile. You don't have to make them laugh. You don't have to make them cry. You don't have to talk to them a ton. Just try to make them smile. And then see how your intention creates something different. And then that'll be your motivator. So like first, before you get into the next thing, so transition time, decide what you want it to be like. That's specific. I'm using those words specifically. Decide what you want it to be like, and then choose that as an intention. I don't care what it is. See what it does to the environment, and then now your next transition, do the same thing. Oh, I'm getting ready for bed, and I'm gonna tell my spouse goodnight. Well, be way more intentional than just a peck on the cheek and go to bed. Like whatever it is, set an intention every transition, and that'll make a huge step forward in you being an intentional person, especially if you struggle with it. I know that it's strugglesome. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, absolutely. But what you've shared, the insights have been so valuable. Bryan, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us on the podcast today. Phenomenal insights. I love your podcast, The Intentional Way. Encourage everyone to go take a listen. It is phenomenal. Thanks for being here, Bryan. Have a tremendous day, everyone.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.